Welcome to the Transforming Trauma podcast. Transforming Trauma is presented by the NARM Training Institute. I'm your host, Emily Ruth, and I'm so glad you've joined us today. Hi, Transforming Trauma listeners. If you're a licensed mental health professional working with complex trauma and are interested in learning the neuroaffective relational model, we're excited to share with you about our upcoming NARM therapist trainings. The Level 2 NARM therapist training is a clinical training designed for licensed mental health professionals, current mental health graduate students, and active clinical interns and trainees, where you will get trained in a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach for resolving the long-term impacts of ACEs and CPTSD. As you are learning and integrating NARM, you will receive individualized support from a team of skilled, passionate, and supportive trainers led by NARM senior faculty Brad Kammer. If you're interested in learning to support the healing of complex trauma, we encourage you to register now to reserve your spot. For more information and to register, please visit www.narmtraining.com/schedule. And now for our interview with Dr. Gabor Maté. After 20 years of family practice and palliative care experience, Dr. Maté worked for over a decade in Vancouver's downtown East Side with patients challenged by drug addiction and mental illness. Gabor is known for his work on the mind-body unity, attention deficit disorder, as well as his breakthrough analysis of addiction as a psychophysiological response to childhood trauma and emotional loss. An author of 5 books, Gabor's latest is co-written with Daniel Maté and is titled The Myth of Normal, Trauma, Illness, and Healing in a Toxic Culture. It became an instant New York Times bestseller. The duo's next book, Hello Again, A Fresh Start for Parents and Their Adult Children, is in progress. Please enjoy our conversation. Okay, so for today's conversation, I am sitting here with Dr. Gabor Maté, and we are so excited to have you back on Transforming Trauma. Welcome, Gabor.
Nice to be back. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah. And I just want to say on a personal note, your work has had such a profound impact on my life. And I know I'm not the only one who's really excited to hear this conversation today, having kind of a pinch me moment right now. It's just really special to have one of my most influential trauma mentors back with us to go deeper into your work.
Thank you.
So how we often begin these conversations is to ask our guests what they would like listeners to get out of our time together. So I'll invite you to share. Do you have a sense for what you'd like listeners to come away with today?
Well, the best compliment I've had on my book, The Myth of Normal, is somebody said to me, I read your book and I remembered myself. So I'm hoping that out of this conversation, people will get to understand and remember themselves.
I love that. I love that. The last time you were here, you and Dr. Larry Heller discussed how you both hold and define trauma and why trauma is so often misunderstood. And so, Gabor, in your new book, The Myth of Normal, you really expand on that. So I was hoping that we could pick up where you left off and just dive right back in. I wondered if you could talk about why mental illness and addictions are normal responses to abnormal circumstances.
Right. So we can look at addictions and other mental health conditions as abnormalities, as diseases of the brain, which is really how mainstream medicine, in which I was trained, looks at it. However, take something like an addiction, just as an example. I'll give you a definition of an addiction. An addiction is manifested in any behavior in which a person finds temporary relief or pleasure and therefore craves, but then suffers negative consequences and doesn't give up or cannot give up despite the harm. So pleasure, craving, relief in the short term, harm in the long term, difficult giving it up. That's what an addiction is. So that could include substances, obviously, from nicotine to caffeine to alcohol to heroin to crystal meth, whatever. Or it could include sex, gambling, pornography, shopping, eating, work, extreme sports, gaming, internet, Facebook, anything, right?
Yeah.
I give this definition and then I ask people, well, according to this definition, have you ever had any kind of an addiction in your life? And I don't care what it was, and I don't ask people what it was, just anything. So can I ask you, according to the definition, have you had an addictive pattern ever in your life, ever?
Me, for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'll ask you is not what was wrong with the addiction, but what was right about it. What did you like about it? What did it give you in the short term? Whatever it was, then I'm not going to ask you what it was.
Yeah. Yeah. It helped me escape something that was so deeply painful that I escaped from my reality, sort of. Absolutely.
So it's a pain reliever, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
In other words, the addiction wasn't your primary problem and it wasn't a disease. It was an attempt to solve a problem. And the problem was of pain, emotion. The addiction wasn't a disease. inherited or otherwise. It was your attempt to solve the problem of emotional pain. And hence, as I say in the book of The Myth of Normal, my mantra is don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain.
Yeah.
Now, is pain relief a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, for a young girl that had no other options, yes, it was a good thing.
In itself.
Yeah.
So, in
Yeah.
other words, the addiction was a normal response to an abnormal circumstance. The abnormal circumstance is whatever caused you so much emotional distress and pain and left you without resources to deal with them.
That's right.
You didn't have the emotional support, the holding, the connection that would have helped you regulate or soothe your pain. So you turn to the addiction to soothe your pain. That's a normal response to an abnormal circumstance. So that's addiction. Let's take something like depression. What does it mean to depress something? What does it actually mean to depress something? What's the word mean?
To bring it down?
To push it down.
Yeah.
Like when we're driving, we depress the pedal so that we'll go faster.
Mhm.
We depress the brakes so that
Mhm.
we'll stop the car. So depression is pushing down something. Now, what gets pushed on in depression is, as you said, our emotions. Now,
Yeah.
why would somebody push down their emotions? Because in childhood, they get the message that they better not have these emotions because if they do, they will not be acceptable to their nurturing adults. So pushing down the emotions is a normal response to an abnormal circumstance because the child is in need. The human child has a built-in evolutionary driven developmental need for being able to experience all their emotions and have them validated and accepted. Now, when the parenting environment, for whatever reason, I'm not blaming parents here, I'm just saying for whatever reason, the parents have been told to suppress the child feelings because that's the way to raise good kids, or the parents are traumatized, they can't handle the child's emotions, or the parents are too stressed
Yeah.
to actually have the space to hold and validate the child's emotions. In order to be acceptable, the child will push down, depress their emotions, not consciously. It's an automatic defense mechanism. It's a normal response to an abnormal circumstance. And I can go through all the mental health conditions and show you how each of them, in some ways, had a kind of adaptive, normative function in response to abnormal circumstances. So rather than seeing mental diseases, genetic diseases, biological diseases of the brain, they're actually normal responses to abnormal circumstances, which doesn't mean they don't have a biological dimension. Of course they do. Everything is a biological dimension. If I pick up this book in my hand, that's a biological act. It
Mm.
was
Mhm.
instigated by an emotional thought, or at
Mm.
least a cognitive thought. The
Mhm.
point is that the brain's biology itself develops in interaction with the environment. And I could quote you the science that shows that the most important influence on the biological development of the brain, of the physiological circuitry of the brain, the connections, the synapses, the circuits, the networks, is the quality of parent child relationships in the early years so that the biology is shaped by the history.
Mm.
So, yes, there's biology, but
Mhm.
biology tells the history of the child and the adult. So that
Yeah.
in mental health conditions, these are normal responses to abnormal circumstances.
I so appreciate you saying that. I come at this from both I'm a child, obviously, of parents, and I have kids.
Yeah.
So having experienced kind of both directions of feeling that needing to suppress and push down my emotions. And then also when I haven't had capacity to hold what my kids are coming up with. So I just really appreciate you mentioning that because as someone and so many folks who will be listening to this will have been in both positions, right? Where they are the child and they're also the parent. I'm curious, when you talk about these normal responses to abnormal circumstances, how can we find meaning in them, when we're in that difficult position and we know that we've either hurt someone or we've been hurt? How do you find meaning in these addictions or these, responses to abnormal circumstances?
Well, what do you mean by finding meaning?
Well, I'm there's part of me that wants to make sense of it, right? And maybe that's nonsensical, but there's part of me that wants to have it mean something in my life.
Yeah, but they do mean something. If you're depressed, the meaning is that at some point in your life, it was adaptive to suppress your emotions. That's the meaning.
That is the meaning.
Now, the problem is there's a story that happened there. There's something happened. And you were programmed in order to adapt to your environment to emotionally suppress yourself. What
Yeah.
it does not mean is that there's something irrevocably wrong with you. What it does mean is that this was adaptive at some point, but it's not helping you anymore. And that's the whole problem with these childhood adaptations is that they work in the short term, but in the long term, they create problems. Well, for example, let's say you live in a climate where it's very cold in the summer, or sorry, in the winter and very hot in the summer. So in the wintertime, it's adaptive to put on warm clothing
Mm.
without which you would literally freeze to death.
Hmm.
But what if you're still wearing that clothing in the summertime when it gets very hot? Now, the same adaptation that protected and actually saved your life in one environment will threaten your life under different circumstances.
Hmm.
These childhood adaptations are like that.
Yeah.
They help survival in the short term, they create problems in the long term. The difference is if I put on warm clothing in the winter, I'm doing so consciously and deliberately.
Yeah.
And that means I can take it off when it's longer necessary.
Yeah.
These childhood adaptations get wired into our nervous system and our bodies, into our brains. So we can't just choose to drop them just like that. This is where
Right.
trauma healing comes into it. But that's the meaning is that this was useful at some point. It isn't anymore. How can I heal so that I'm not still responding as if I was a child in danger?
Yeah, that reminds me, I don't know if I can't remember if I read it in The Myth of Normal or if I just heard you say it somewhere else, but can you share the story of landing at the airport?
Yeah, yeah, it's in the middle
I feel
normal.
like that's appropriate here.
It's the first episode in the book. I'm 79 now, so this is when I was young and stupid at age 72.
Mm.
I arrived home from a speaking trip to Philadelphia, actually. Arrived here at the airport in Vancouver. I'm feeling really good. Successful trip, good flight home. My wife, Ray, of by that time 45 years or so, she'd pick me up at the airport. But when I land, I get a text saying, I haven't left home yet. Do you still want me to come?
Mm.
And I go into a rage and I take a taxi home. Imagine the indignity of having to take a taxi home,
Mm.
15 minutes from the airport, 20 minutes to my home. And when I come in, I barely even looking at her. And for 24 hours, I give her the cold shoulder, the cold treatment,
Mm.
until she finally says, knock it off already, at which point I did. But what was that all about? Is that when I was an 11-month-old, my mother gave me to a complete stranger to save my life. The meaning that I made out of that, the traumatic wound is I'm not wanted because I'm not lovable.
Mm.
Now, until that wound is resolved, which it hadn't been obviously fully 7 years ago, I arrive at the airport and something trivial like my wife, the woman in my life who I'm relying on, is not showing up. And then I get
Mm.
triggered defensive withdrawal, which incidentally is the normal response of young children when they're separated from their mothers, is that when they see them again, they don't even look at them. It's protective. The brain says you were so hurt when you were abandoned that you're not going to make yourself so vulnerable again. You're going to be angry and upset and you're going to withdraw and not be vulnerable. And so that's how the adaptive response. And by the way, as I found out from my mother many decades after the original incident, when I saw her again after the 5 or 6 week separation, I wouldn't even look at her for several days. I
Yeah.
didn't even look at her. And by the way, dogs will do this too. If you have a dog, and if you go away for a couple of days and you come back, they're going to jump all over you. But if you go away for 2 months, they might not look at you for a few minutes
Mm. They're wounded.
until you scratch their behinds and
Hmm.
their backs and heads, and you make friendly. Dog will drop it quicker than a human being,
Mm.
but they have the same kind of withdrawal reaction.
Yeah. So I wonder, can you talk a little bit about, is there a human nature and can we assume that human nature is selfish and aggressive and individualistic? Because I hear that story or I think about you coming home and giving your wife the cold shoulder for 24 hours. Like there's part of me that understands that that's, protective. And then there's also part of me that wonders, are we as humans just selfish and aggressive and individualistic? Can you speak to that?
Well, wait a minute. Babies are not wired to separate or to not to look at their mothers. Babies are wired to look into the mother's eyes
Hmm.
and be happy. That withdrawal is purely defensive.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to human nature, it's interesting in this society. When somebody does something selfish or aggressive, what do we say? Well, that's just human nature. How about when we do something generous and friendly and open hearted? Do we say,
Mm.
oh, that's just human nature?
Mm.
Why don't we say that? because the selfish, aggressive, competitive view of human nature is the capitalist ideology.
Hmm.
We assume that the way many people behave in the society is human nature. But let me tell you about, is it the nature of an elephant to lie around the whole day and to get up for a few minutes, walk around a bit, eat, defecate, and lie down again? Is that the nature of an elephant?
That's what they do.
In the zoo,
Mm.
that's not what they do in the wild. So if you want to study an elephant, don't study him in the zoo.
Okay. Tell me what they do in the wild. I've never seen them in the wild.
Well, they're communal creatures. They walk on in large groups. When a new elephant is born, all the other mother elephants stand around, and as soon as the new elephant plops on the ground, all the mothers stroke them with their trunks.
Mm. Mm.
They embrace each other when they die. They're
Yeah.
protective of each other. They're communal. They communicate. That's the nature of an elephant, and they're very active. So if you understand an elephant, don't study him in a zoo or lions or any other creature. Same with human beings. If you understand human beings, don't study them in artificial environments.
Mm.
Now, how we evolved was as communal creatures, cooperative, collaborative, in small band hunter-gatherer groups. That's how we evolved over millions of years. In fact, we would not have evolved if it had not been that way.
Mm.
Nobody could have evolved on their own as a
Right.
singular, aggressive creature. It just wouldn't have worked,
No.
you know. So we were born, we were evolved to care for our young, to hold our young, to carry them with us, for young children to be around adults all day, for the community to support the individual. That's how we evolved as a creature. And even in the existence of our hominins or human-like creatures have been around for millions of years. That's how we evolved. Our own species, Homo sapiens, has been around about 150, 200,000 years. Most of those years, for close to 15, 12,000 years ago, we lived in small band hunter-gatherer groups. If you want to understand human nature, look at small band hunter-gatherers,
Yeah.
not people living in isolation in a system with huge inequality, in a system with poverty, in a system with racism, in a system with genderism, in a
Hmm.
system with ageism. Don't try and tell me what human nature is when people are living under completely artificial circumstances. Now, every society will have a particular view of human nature that reflects its own experience. But it's a mistake to think that the way we are in the Western capitalist world is actually human nature. We could never have evolved as a species if it had been. No, what it actually means is that there's not a predictable human nature. Like you can't look at a human being and say, it's their nature to be this way and they're going to be that way. It's, if I had an acorn in my hand, it's in the nature of the acorn to develop into a mighty oak tree.
Hmm.
But will that do that under any circumstances?
No, it's got to have the right environment and nourishment and all of that.
So if you want to know human nature, ask yourself, what kind of human beings will we get or do we get when human essential developmental needs are met?
Yeah.
And, and if you don't, and so that, for example, if you look at, say, serial killers, well, don't tell me what human nature is based on looking at serial killers. Tell me what happened to that
Yeah.
person. Invariably, they were abused horribly, and that distorted their development, which then made them commit horrible things. But that's not human nature. Human nature simply is if you treat kids well, they're going to be okay and they're going to be, for the most part, compassionate, empathetic, and collaborative. And if you don't, you're going to get distortions.
Can you name some of those essential needs that a young human, a developing human really needs that when those needs aren't met, that they result in these distortions that you're talking about?
Well, it's really interesting because in the myth and normal, I talk about what we call the irreducible needs of children. And irreducible means if you don't meet them, you're going to create distortions of development. So, what are the irreducible needs of human beings, human infants, for healthy development? First of all, a strong attachment relationship in which they feel absolutely secured and welcome. That's just a need.
Yeah.
We can grow without it, but our development is going to be distorted. Our sense of ourselves is going to be distorted. So, a strong, unconditionally loving attachment context. That's an irreducible need of the human child. Secondly, and I'm quoting here a brilliant psychologist friend of mine, Gordon Neufeld, with whom I wrote a book together called Hold On to Your Kids.
Hmm.
The second irreducible need is rest, which means the child doesn't have to work to make the relationship with the adult work. The
Mm.
relationship is just there. The child doesn't have to be cute, pretty, compliant, nice, successful, good at anything. They're just accepted for who they are. There's no work involved. There's nothing the child can do to break their relationship with the adult. And if the relationship gets broken, there's nothing the child needs to do to rebuild it because the adult will provide it. So
Mm.
that's rest from having to make the relationship work. That's the second developmental need of the child. The third one is now our brains are wired for all kinds of emotions, along with other mammals. So we're wired for anger, for love, for joy, for playfulness, for curiosity, and fear
Oh, yeah.
and grief.
Hmm.
We have brain circuits that modulate and express these emotions. We share these circuits with other mammals, by the way. So the child needs to have the freedom. This is the third need, to experience all their emotions as they come up and have them validated by adults, have
Mm.
them mirrored. That's the third one. The fourth need is play, free, spontaneous play. Play
Hmm.
is much more important for brain development. All this baby Mozart nonsense, baby Einstein
Hmm.
nonsense. It's not the cognitive circuits that drive healthy development, it's the emotional circuits. And
Mm.
and for that you need free spontaneous play. When I say spontaneous play, I don't mean with gadgets and iPads. I mean
Right.
spontaneous creative play. Now, in our society, very few kids have those needs met. The interesting thing here is if you study hunter gatherer groups, those are the needs they actually provide for their kids
Hmm.
spontaneously, automatically, not because some parenting experts taught them, but because that's how we evolved. So, in other words, for example, in hunter-gatherer grade groups, kids don't get put down to cry on their own. They're carried everywhere. As soon as they cry, they're picked up. If they're even
Right.
put down, kids are not made to sleep on their own away from the parents and to cry themselves to sleep. Sleep train them. When a kid is crying, it's because they need to be held. That's a need of the child to connect with the parents. And babies can only connect physically.
Yeah.
See, you and I could be friends, and we might not see each other for years, but we can still love each other or care for each other just because we can hold each other in our hearts.
Right.
Babies can't do that. They can
Yeah.
only attach physically, so that when they're not picked up, they're losing their attachment relationship, so they cry. When they cry, their brains are suffused with stress hormones that interferes with brain development. All the parenting advice that parent gets these days, it's almost designed to interfere with healthy brain development. So what I'm saying is that these irreducible needs of children, those four that I mentioned, they're precisely what evolution prepared us to do. And by the way, if you're a parent and if you ever tried this technique of letting your kid cry but then also sleep, what was in your heart when you were doing that?
Well, I think I'm fortunate that I didn't ever do that. I had support. That wasn't
Good.
something I ever really considered, but from what speaking to those who have, it's like their heart just shatters. Like it goes against everything in them. Their nature is telling them to pick up their child, and they're going
Exactly.
against that.
That's why this is a toxic culture,
Mhm.
because it denies essential human needs and it creates abnormal conditions.
Yeah.
And what's the message to the child when they're not being picked up is that your feelings don't matter. You don't matter. Parent doesn't intend to give that message, but
Right.
that's the message the child gets.
Right.
There's so much in this culture that runs athwart human needs, and then we wonder why there's so much dysfunction.
You're naming some of these problems. I'm thinking, I don't know, this feels related even to materialism and like this need that we have to control. And as a parent, maybe, I picked up my kids and I didn't let them cry, but I've made plenty of other mistakes. And I'm just
Yeah,
thinking about, times when I haven't had capacity to hold and maybe, it's so tempting to want to get our kids set up with a tablet or,
yeah,
to depress those emotions that are coming up right at us as parents. And so I'm thinking about this piece of how materialism and, giving our kids all of these things to kind of set them up and temporarily, pacify our own discomfort, maybe as parents, but how that's really affecting our kids and on a larger scale, how it's affecting our culture.
Yes. So it's impossible to blame individual parents. I mean, it's just so tough to be a parent. The problem is that again, we were not designed to parent as isolated, a single mom or a single dad, or even just a single couple.
Yeah.
We evolved to parent in communities. It takes a village to raise a child. That statement has a meaning to it. And then that meaning reflects our evolutionary nature. So it's difficult to blame a parent who is stressed economically or relationally or whatever, and the kid is upset. Well, here's an iPad. Go soothe yourself.
Right.
Not a question of blaming, but that child loses human contact. That child learns to soothe themselves through some technological gadgetry rather than developing the internal circuitry of self-regulation, you know. And the
Mhm.
message is they don't matter. And not even to mention, and again, I talk about this in the myth of normal, is that the technology companies are quite deliberate in developing gadgetry that'll get the kids' brains addicted to the technology. It's called neuromarketing. They target the nervous system of the child to get them hooked on the technology so they can sell more products. And then if you look at the brains of kids, the more gadgetry they watch, you can see the difference in brain development, and the circuits of insight and empathy and compassion don't develop as well. You
Right.
can see some brain scans already. This has already been demonstrated. And yet, the poor parent, what are they going to do? They're
Mhm.
isolated, overwhelmed. Let's use the television set or the computer or the iPad or the cell phone as a babysitter. And the effects are toxic.
I struggle with this piece, and maybe you can share some of your insights around this because I feel like when I was growing up in the 80s, there just wasn't all of this, technological advances that we have now. There weren't iPads and there weren't cell phones. And so it was really, I think in some ways maybe that was nice because when I was bored, what was I going to do? I had no other options. I would just, go out, play in the desert, and I grew up here in Arizona, and so out in the desert and in the trees and, like, out in
Yeah,
nature, that was kind of like that was the option I had, and now
yeah.
I feel like if our kids get bored, what do? Like, there's so much around them in terms of, options for technology and all of that, so I'm wondering what advice you might give parents who are in a position like I am, like, I want my kids to be bored because I want them to be pushed to be creative because that's, how I know I was creative, but what can you say about that?
Well, my friend Gordon Neufeld, the psychologist who I just quoted, he
Mhm.
jokingly once said to me that the only time a kid should be sent to his room by themselves is when they're bored. You know, go and figure it out, you know?
Yeah.
First of all, who gets bored? People who are disconnected from themselves. Somebody's fully alive and connected, they don't get bored. Everything is interesting.
Mm,
You don't see a bored 1.5-year-old. You see bored 5-year-olds, but not 1.5-year-olds.
mm,
Technology itself then creates an expectation for instantaneous relief and instantaneous distraction. When it's not available, people get bored.
mm.
The technology itself creates the boredom. It both caters to it and creates it. Now, if I was raising kids today, I would not let them near a screen for many years. I say that advisedly. Let them play with the dirt, let them play with a puddle in the mud and a stick. That's going to promote the creative circuitry of their brain. Watching technology disables the creative circuitry of the brain.
Mm.
It makes them passive recipients rather than creators of experience. And furthermore, as I said before, it's addictive, it's isolating, it's alienating. Again, it's addictive.
Yeah.
Try and peel a screen addicted kid off their computer. You're going to get the typical addictive behavior of rage, resistance, denial. You know, that's how addicts behave. I've worked with addicted people. I know how they
Yeah.
behave when they don't get their drugs. You
Yeah.
know, it's an addict in withdrawal, and literally they're in withdrawal because their
Mhm.
brain is not getting the stimulation that they've been acculturated or ingrained into expecting. If I was to raise a kid today, there'd be no screen or very limited screen in the house for them.
Mm.
I have a computer in my room,
Mhm.
and is there a place for technology? Sure, there is. It's wonderful stuff in the right hands. But sex is wonderful too. But you don't introduce 5-year-olds to sex. Why? Because they're not mature enough to handle it.
Hmm.
It's the same with technology. You introduce it when they're ready for it, and they're ready for it when they're mature enough not to get addicted to it and not to rely on it. When they can use it rather than being used by them, by the technology.
Yeah.
And so, in the book I co-wrote with Gordon Neufeld, "Hold On to Your Kids: Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers," we have a couple of chapters on how to introduce the digital world to children. And it all depends on if the child is still relating to me as the guidance, the guiding presence in their lives, then I can guide their use of the technology. But if I don't have the strong enough attachment relationship where they actually look to me for guidance, give them the technology, they're going to use it to connect with their immature peers, to go on pornography sites, to play endless, repetitive, non-creative, mind-numbing games on the internet.
Hmm.
So it much depends on what's the quality of my relationship with my child. When I introduce that technology, can they do so under my guidance? Can they engage with it under my guidance? That's the key.
And what you described, what happens with the brain, I mean, to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, that sounds like trauma. Like there's some trauma in the brain. There's some damage going on there, if you could hold it that way.
It's documentable. It has been documented.
So for a parent who maybe is struggling in that way, maybe their kid has already been, engaging with technology in this way. How can we, the name of the podcast is Transforming Trauma. So how can we transform that? How could we maybe turn that around? And
It's very difficult for two reasons. One is the kid is hooked on the technology. They're literally addicted. If you ever dealt with an addicted person in your life, that addiction runs their lives. You try and separate them from it, and you're going to get severe resistance and rage.
right. And I said kids, but gosh, how many adults struggle with this too? So I don't mean to just pin it on the kids.
Number one. Number two, as we make the point in Hold On to Your Kids, and as I reiterate in the myth of normal, in this society, children's relationship with adults is really undermined by all kinds of reasons. I mean, 25% of American women have to go back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth, which amounts to a massive abandonment of a quarter of our children. Because those
Mm.
children need that mom for many, 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 many months. The child can only experience that as an abandonment. Now,
Mm.
and in general, because of the lack of the communal structure with the, with the band and the village and so on, the community, the extended family, children lose their adult attachment relationships very quickly. And they don't see their parents most of the day. They have to connect with somebody. Who do they connect with? Their peer group. And now the peer group becomes the dominant influence on their development, which is never how nature intended it. Nature never intended immature creatures to lead each other to maturity. They can't do it. Now, the internet and the cell phone and the computers gives us another venue for the kids to be with each other, even when they're not physically.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
even when they're not in school or in the preschool or whatever they happen to be at, physically with the other kids, what do? They go get on their cell phones or Facebook, and it gives another platform for kids just to hang out with each other. And so much happens, as we know,
Yeah.
on Facebook that's so negative that adults don't even know about. When we find out is when some kid kills themselves because they were bullied on Facebook. The parents didn't even know about it. Now that's a sign of disconnect between adults and children. That's
Mhm.
very characteristic in our culture, and the internet reinforces it.
Yeah.
So, oh boy, it's difficult. First of all, prevent the problem in the first place. Maintain that attachment relationship with your children.
The connection. Yeah.
Don't let the peer group take over. You know, and again, we talk about that in the book, Hold On to Your Kids. Number one. Number two, if you've lost it, don't try and force the issue. You can never force the kid. I mean, once they're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, especially when they're teenagers, you try and put the force on, all you're going to get is resistance. What you have to do is literally rebuild the attachment relationship. You have to bring them back into that attachment relationship where they're looking to you, where they want to be with you, when they want to be good for you, when they want to heed your guidance. You can do it, but it's not a question of force. It's a question of the power of the attachment relationship. The good news is that it's only adults who can provide the necessary adult relationship. Peers can provide attachment relationships, but they're very deficient.
Yeah.
They're not unconditional. They're very contingent. on kids fitting in with the expectations of the group. You as the adults have to provide that unconditional loving relationship. Bring them back. So as Gordon says, collect them before you direct them.
I love that. Good advice. Can you talk about how do you hold well, basically, what is healing? How do you see that taking place? You talked a little bit about it just now, the connection piece, but I wonder if you can say more.
Sure. So the essence of trauma is a disconnection from yourself. Why did you disconnect from yourself? Because it was too painful to be connected. So if I'm being ignored or my parents are stressed, they're not receiving me, they're not hearing me, or if worse, they're hurting me. It's too painful to be in my own body as a young child. Now, if there's an adult around who can recognize my pain and my grief and can hold me in it, then I know that it's okay to feel pain and grief because I'll get through it. But I mean, the essence of trauma is that you're all alone with it.
Mhm.
Nobody there to actually hear you and receive you and validate you. The feelings are way too painful. What's it like for you and I as adults to feel emotional pain or grief? It's very difficult, especially if we're completely alone with it. And we're adults. What's it like for a young child, 2 or 3 years old, 5 years old? It's unbearable. Disconnection then is a normal response to an abnormal circumstance. But that disconnection is the deepest wound there is. So if disconnection is the essence of trauma, disconnection from yourself and from a supportive environment, then reconnecting is the healing of trauma. And healing actually comes from an Anglo-Saxon word for wholeness.
Mhm.
So disconnection is the loss of that wholeness. Healing is the regaining of that wholeness. And as we point out in this book, a metanormal, it's not a one-time thing. It's not like, okay, snap your fingers and you had a great session or even a wonderful psychedelic experience or a good relational journey and now you're healed. No, it's an ongoing process. But the more you reconnect with yourself, the more authentic you'll be, the more you'll be able to be in the present moment and be with your pain, be with your grief, be with your joy, whatever it is. It's an ongoing process towards increasing level of reconnection with yourself and wholeness. So that's what healing is. And actually, we even use a very interesting word for healing sometimes. People who are addicted and they heal. What's the word they use? Recovery.
Recovery, yeah.
What does it mean to recover something?
To get it back, to reclaim it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mhm.
And when you ask people, what did you recover? What did you find again? What did you reclaim after illness or after mental illness or addiction? I recovered myself. So
Mhm.
that from the self is the biggest, it's the deepest aspect of trauma. It's also the healing. The recovery is the healing. Now, how to get there? Well, that's what Larry Haller teaches, who's not with us today. What I teach, what a lot of other very adept and creative therapists and physicians and psychologists also teach. There's not one particular method that works for everyone. I developed a program called Compassionate Inquiry. People can check that out. It's not for everybody. Nothing is for everybody. My friend Dick Schwartz, Internal Family Systems, it's wonderful. It's not for everybody. Nothing is for everybody. Larry Heller's neuroaffective relational model, it's great for many people. It's not for everybody. Nothing is for everybody. Meditation, awareness, yoga,
Mhm.
great. It's not for everybody. Nothing is for everybody. But between all that's out there and our nature given capacity for healing, it's attainable.
I love that, and I like to trust that we'll each feel the impulse and guided to what will be our most beneficial modality or, model or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as you mentioned in the beginning, your model, the compassionate inquiry, that it's a model to guide people back to themselves. I love to think that any model that folks are using, that hopefully it would guide them back to themselves.
Yeah, it's basically based on the fundamental principle that the truth is inside all of us, although we're
Mhm.
disconnected from it. And by asking the right questions, by making the right compassionate self examination or guided self examination, we can find out, reconnect with the truth of ourselves.
I love it. Well, I want to thank you for your time. And we've mentioned the book, The Myth of Normal, throughout the interview. But can you share with listeners what is it that's in that book that you would hope that they would gain? And I know we can find it pretty much anywhere.
I'm happy to tell you that we're speaking on a Monday, and in yesterday's New York Times, this book for the 18th week was on the New York Times bestseller list, you know.
It's so exciting.
And here in Canada, where I live, it's been on the bestseller list consistently without a week being missed. And it's being published in over 30 countries now. In my home country, Hungary was the best-selling book last year. So, I mean, it is a book for the public. It's not an easy read, I promise you, in two senses. One is that we do teach a lot of science in it, although I think it's very digestible. But it's also not easy because it'll really confront you with yourself. And that's the whole idea. I want people to read this book and find themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's the essence of the book. And to find themselves in a culture that's almost designed to take us away from ourselves, to take us away from what matters into what doesn't matter. And that's how this culture thrives. And so many industries are based on creating false needs that even when they're met, they create more false needs. And I'm saying we have true needs. And I want people to be identify what they truly need and to give them a pathway moving towards that. So that's what I'm hoping people will get from this book.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that the book will be a mirror to their experience where they can see themselves very clearly.
Yeah. And you wrote it with your son, correct?
I wrote this book with my son, Daniel, a brilliant writer himself and a lyricist. He's really great with words and just a very insightful person. This is my fifth book. I could not have done this book without Daniel's support because the subject was so big, and it's 500 pages now. And I'm told it's a good read, but when we originally wrote it, it was 1,000 pages long. So that there's so much that we had to rewrite and reshape and cut out and so on to make it practicable for people to read it. And so my son was actively involved in making it reader friendly and helping to shape the chapters, making sure that we were communicating clearly, making sure that the structure flowed and that one segment led to the other. So we co-wrote it, and we're writing another book together. But this book was mostly my creation and was my ideas mostly and my research and my medical experience, the interviews that I did. The next book, it's going to be 50-50. It's going to be called Hello Again, A Fresh Start for Adult Children and Their Parents. And believe me, that's because we've had to do our work.
Well, that's what I was wondering if you would speak about just a little bit, and what you just named, this piece of that writing The Myth of Normal was such a personal experience. I've heard you both speak about it in different venues, and that it really kind of brought up all of your own life stuff in front of you, and which so many of us in the field of mental health, we have to deal with our own pieces here. And so I really appreciate how you've talked about it, how Daniel's talked about it.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited to hear about this new book too that's coming out.
We have to write it first. So,
Okay.
we've been collecting ideas and interviews for some years, but in a few weeks, we're actually going to go on a road trip together just to hang out and fully immerse ourselves and see what happens. I expect it will come out in late 2024. I'm hoping it'll be then, maybe it'll be 2025. But in the meanwhile, it's a workshop that we do and people can check it out. It's a workshop we might do online sometime. We'll do it in person in certain areas. We've done it in New York. We've done it in Vancouver. We'll probably do it in San Francisco later on this year. And you can also find it on YouTube where Daniel and I talk about it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing all of these pieces, all of your work. For the listeners, we'll be sure to put all of those in the show notes so they can access your work. And we just so appreciate you coming back on the podcast. And I've really enjoyed hearing your thoughts on trauma and healing. And we didn't get into the psychedelics piece, which I was hoping we might have time for, but maybe next time. But thank you again so much, Gabor. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, and take care.
Take care.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. To find more about our guest and their work, check the show notes or visit us at narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma.
If you're a licensed mental health professional working with complex trauma, we're excited to share with you about our upcoming NARM therapist trainings. Level 2 training is a clinical training where you will get trained in a comprehensive developmental framework and clinical approach for resolving the long-term impacts of ACEs and CPTSD You will receive individualized support from a team of skilled and supportive trainers led by NARM Senior Faculty Brad Kammer. Learn more about this training or reserve your spot by visiting www.narmtraining.com/schedule. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We look forward to building community, connection with you, and changing the world by transforming trauma.